Hey everyone, if you've noticed I'm wearing a hat in this video, it's because I cut my own hair and it looks terrible. So we're keeping the hat. If your job is like mine, you're constantly being overwhelmed and inundated with tons of information. What's the rupture modulus of concrete? What's the depth of fixity for driven piles? Who keeps microwaving fish at work? Anyone can cram information in the short term, but moving it from short term to long term is something that a lot of people complain about. In this video, I'll show you 3 easy methods to memorize technical information and make it stick in the long term. Speaking of making it stick, a lot of my advice in here is adapted or inspired by a book called Make It Stick by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel. So if you're interested in this, or if you like the advice that I give, definitely check out their book. I'll try to link it in the description below. The 3 things I'm going to introduce are not new ideas, but I'm going to change the typical way in which they're used and the intentions that you should keep while you use them. The major tenets of these techniques are delayed, spaced, and interleaved recall practice. Recall practice in that you yourself are recalling the information without any external help. As you use the 3 methods I introduce, try to keep those basic tenets in mind and really push yourself to recall as much as possible without any form of assistance. If your brain struggles to remember something, you're subtly telling it that it's on its own and that if it wants to keep that information, it's going to have to make room for it in your brain. You're telling it that this information is important. And with that, let's get to the first method. Work journaling. Now, before you skip this, there's a twist. You should only use your work journal at the very end of the day after everything has happened, and you do your best to recall all the events and all the conversations that you have, digest it, and write it down on paper. What's important here is that you run through every event in your head and try to make sense of it. Trying to put it into words, even if you ultimately fail to, will help you digest the day's events. Waiting until the end of the day provides enough space in between the events so that your brain is forced to recall that information and not just shove it into short-term memory when you first hear about it. That spaced recall really challenges your brain and tells it that that information wasn't only just important in the moment that it was introduced. Now it's important enough to be stored in long-term memory. The other benefit of this journaling method is that it pokes holes in your memory daily and painfully highlights anything that you might have forgotten. If your boss tells you that, shear is a brittle failure while flexure is not, but you can't remember which is which, that's a plain indicator that you didn't remember everything that they were talking about, and that you should go back to that topic and review it some more. This method is good for remembering conversations and broad ideas, but when it comes to remembering specific details and specific information, I would recommend method number 2, and that is flashcards. Here's the trick for using flashcards in your everyday work life. As soon as a topic comes up that you think you'll need to remember later and it's very technical and specific, write it down on a flashcard, write the answer on the back, and forget about it. This seems counterintuitive, but it's going along with our first method. Providing space in between the initial memory and the recall practice reinforces the information and tells your brain that it's not just going to be used in that first moment, but needs to be stored in your memory long term. This next part is important as well. Don't sort your flashcards. Add all of your flashcards to a single pile called the unknown pile and shuffle that pile daily. The unknown pile will contain an assortment of flashcards of different topics. Having different topics intermingled into one pile will mimic the way that this information is recalled in real-life situations. When a coworker or a boss asks you the answer to a specific question, it's not going to be in combination with other related questions in the way that it would be on a regular quiz. It's going to be out of the blue, unrelated, and just all around difficult to answer. So if you try to mimic that with your assortment of topics in your flashcard pile, you'll have an easier time recalling that information in the real life situations. Shuffling the topics of your cards will make them seem random and seem unpredictable. This is what the authors of Make It Stick mean when they say that your recall practice should be varied and interleaved, different topics interleaved with each other. Personally, I practice every time I sit down for breakfast before work. It gets my brain warmed up in a low-stakes situation, and it gives me a sense of accomplishment like first thing in the morning. I pick out 5 flashcards each day after shuffling my pile, and I quiz myself on all 5 questions without looking at any of the answers. When I'm done quizzing myself and I have all of my answers in my head, then I look at the back of the flashcards. Delaying the answers again helps push that information into long-term memory and adds a level of struggle that I promise will squeeze the answer out of your brain more effectively than if you just looked at the back of the flashcard right away. When I get a question right, it goes into the known flashcard pile and it gets taken out of circulation for the time being. If I get a card wrong, it goes back into the unknown pile to be reviewed again later. The unknown pile is shuffled every single time I grab flashcards out of it, and the known pile is added back into the mix after a few months of being out of circulation. This effort goes on forever if you wanted to, or you can permanently remove some of the flashcards that you really know that you have down pat. If you have the space and the temperament for it, I'd recommend never removing flashcards permanently. The last method is probably something that you're not going to like, and it might even be why you clicked on this video. And that is to stop taking notes. Sounds dumb, right? Sounds like a good way to forget everything. I'd still recommend jotting down vital to-dos or things that you'd like to circle back to and review later. But writing every single thing down as it's happening is what we're trying to avoid. Again, if you'd like to wait till the end of the day and recall it in your recall journal, that's fine. But when you're in a meeting taking notes like a stenographer, you're telling your brain, I don't need to remember this information because I have it written down. Well, if you never go back to actually quiz yourself on that information, which working people rarely do, that's going to remain on the page and never make its way into long-term memory. You'll end the week with hundreds of notes, and you better hope that you're good at organizing, or else you can just say goodbye to that info forever. If you want proof of this effect, you can check out the study linked in the description and read about a memory study that looked at how well people remembered paintings. In this study, there were two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A was given cameras, while Group B was not. Both groups were told to look at some paintings. Group A was allowed to take photos, and Group B was not. When asked about the paintings later on, Group A was not able to remember any of the details or even the paintings themselves. Group B, on the other hand, was able to remember even minute details. This was attributed to Group A relying too heavily on the cameras to do their remembering for them. The same concept goes for notes if the notes are too detailed. Why would you put effort into remembering the information if you can just refer to the notes that you took? Your notebook turns into an external hard drive, and your brain gets to relax. As I mentioned, the alternative to detailed note-taking is Notes Light. If you're juggling hundreds of to-dos, you're not looking to put those into long-term memory. And if you forget about them, then your work might suffer. Go ahead and jot down all action items, all to-dos from your meetings, or as they come up naturally. Also at risk of being missed are concepts that you don't understand. One of the best ways to remember something is to relate it to something that you already know. If you don't know anything about something, it can be pretty hard to remember it at all. I make notes of things like that to go back to and review later. But the key here is to make it vague. If someone mentions pushover analysis and you don't know what that is, just write pushover ? This vagueness will get your brain working in the background and try to piece together whatever the answer might be. Everyone works differently, and these are just memory tricks that work for me on the job. If you have methods that you'd like to share or ways in which you think that you could improve my methods, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to respond to every single comment. If you found this stuff helpful or interesting, consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video. Say goodbye.